Learning Perek Aleph, Halacha Gimel on Yom HaKippurim, Hilchos Yom HaKippurim. Halacha Gimel begins, Shivas Yom Kodim Yom HaKippurim, 7 days before Yom Kippur, Mafrishin Kohen Gadol Beisoy. We separated Kohen Gadol from his household to Lishkos Reisha Mikdash, to his room or office in the Beis HaMikdash. In the Peirush we have this in the Mishnah, the first Mishnah in Yom. The 7 days before Yom Kippur, you separate the Kohen Gadol to Lishkas Parhedron, or Parhedron. The Gemara explains that was where the officers of the king were. That's what it means. Were there. Since the Kohanim Gedolim were in the second Bayis Sheni, many of them were not of themselves worthy of being Kohanim Gedolim, but they used to pay, and therefore every year there would be a new one. So they were like the appointed officers of the king, that he would change them every year. It was called Lishkas Parhedron, rather than Lishkas of the Kohen Gadol. Where is this in the Beis HaMikdash? Rambam doesn't say that the name of this room was Parhedron. Rabbi Kimchi, Talmud of Chaim Abulafia, in his Peirush Yisrael on the work of Yom Kippur, the services of Yom Kippur, cites that in the literature we say, Atokinanto, you have established the whole Seder, the whole order of the way the Avodah was done. The Python doesn't mention either the room, just to his room, to his office, to his quarters, like the Rambam. And he explains, according to the Gemara in Yuma 19a, Amar Popo, there were two rooms for the Kohen Gadol. One was Lishkas Parhedron, and one was Lishkas Beis Haftinas. That the Beis Haftinas would make the incense. And Rashi explains that Lishkas Parhedron was specifically for the Kohen Gadol to sleep there. And therefore the Lashon HaMishnah, Lishkas Parhedron, and more Lishkas Kohen Gadol. Therefore the Rambam writes, Lishkos Reisha Mikdash. So you have, he doesn't want to say it's Kohen Gadol, doesn't want to say it's Parhedron, he just says to his quarters. The Rambam says that this is something that we have as a Kabbalah in Moshe Sinai, and the Gdolei Achronim, the later commentaries that were questioning the Gemara. There's a question: where do you learn that you have to separate the Kohen Gadol 7 days? From which pasuk? And they explain it's from the Torah, not something that we have accepted from Moshe Rabbeinu. Ma'im Chaim, the Pri Chodesh on the Rambam, explains that even in the Yerushalmi, it would seem it's a definite derivation from the Torah. Why does the Rambam have to say it's Halacha L'Moshe Sinai? In Hilchos Aduma, the Rambam also writes that the 7 days before burning of the Torah, we separate the Kohen Gadol who burns it from his house, just like you separate a Kohen Gadol for Yom HaKippurim. He concludes, this is a Kabbalah min Moshe Rabbeinu, like we write by the separating of the Kohen Gadol before Yom Kippur. And there he questions, the Mishnah Lamelech questions, that it seems it's a derivation from a posuk. And certainly, for the 7 days before the Torah, maybe it's only M'Rabbanan, because we don't find it in the Torah specifically. But separating the Kohen Gadol before Yom Kippur is definitely in the Torah. And he remains also with the question. Many of the later commentaries want to explain that the intent of the Rambam is that even though it's Minat Torah, it since it doesn't say specifically so in the Posuk, it's called Kabbalah Moshe Sinai, Moshe Rabbeinu, Sinai. And there are those who want to say the opposite. It's a Kabbalah, and it's only M'Rabbanan that they relied on the Posuk. It's not a real derivation. He's separated from his wife, he cannot cohabit with her. Lest in the middle of the relationship, his wife will be a nido, and he'll be tummy for 7 days. He wouldn't be allowed to do the work because on Yom Kippur he'll be tummy. In the Tshuvas HaTashbaz is a long answer on the 10 Nisan that were done for our forefathers in the Beis HaMikdash. One of them is that the Kohen Gadol never saw Keri on Yom Kippur. And then he explains what they separate the Kohen Gadol from his house in Torah, as we mentioned earlier, that this is why we do it. But the separation from his wife is not Minat Torah. But we find in Yuma and in Yerushalmi, it explains that his wife could be with him in the same place. And Tosfos writes that the Lishkas Kohen Gadol was in a section of Har HaBayis that was under the ground, and anything that's under the ground is not sanctified, because on Har HaBayis one is not allowed to be about carry and remain there, and or have a relationship with his wife and remain there. And he would, if he needed to, he would go to the mikveh of Yom Kippur for his carry, and then he could do the shemesh. He could do the avodah after the sun goes down, because it's only one day, not 7 days. The Gemara explains that it is because we're afraid of his wife becoming a nida. Tanya Abiyudah B'Mseira says maybe his wife will be a sofek nida, but the Rambam writes maybe she'll be found to be a nida, not a sofek nida. And it's true. We have the question of Avodas Yisrael, why the Rambam changes the lashon for the Gemara. We don't have to here. In our translation here, we can't go into that detail. And we establish for him another Kohen Gadol in Sheim Yera B'Zeh Psul, if somehow he should become unworthy of doing the avodah, the other one will do it. This is the Mishnah, beginning of Yuma. The Gemara says you prepare from Kohen Sheni, and they didn't separate that Kohen Sheni for 7 days. 7 days only, it doesn't impede the doing of the avodah. Therefore, the one who comes in his place, if something happens, or if Chas v'Shalom the Kohen Gadol dies on Yom Kippur, the other one takes over, even though he wasn't separated 7 days. The Rambam continues, "Bein shiur by peaceful kodim te'emet shel shachas, bein shiur by peaceful achar she'ekrivu ha'karbona." It doesn't matter when the first Kohen Gadol cannot do the avodah. Is it before he begins, or he does it even after he brought his korban? The Rambam says, and why is he mentioned Tomel Shachar? That the second one does the avodas of Tomel Shachar. He does it with 8 begodim, because the avodah of Yom Kippur is in 4 begodim, and then he becomes with 8 begodim. He definitely becomes a Kohen Gadol, and he can continue. And if he did it after he brought the korban tomid, we're now the Kohen Gadol is wearing only 4 begodim. So what causes him to become a Kohen Gadol if he's not wearing the 8 begodim? It is that he does the avodah. That's why the Rambam continues with the language that the one who comes in does not need chinuch to be taught, and he doesn't need the 8 begodim. It also means the fact that he's doing the service on Yom Kippur, that in itself makes him a Kohen Gadol. Now there are Amoraim in Yuma 12 who disagree. How does he become a Kohen Gadol? Now, if it happens to be before Tomel Shel Shachar, then you have the begodim as we mentioned, and he can do the avodah. But if it happened after he did the Tomel Shel Shachar, and now the time of the avodas hayoyim, which is done with 4 begodim, there's no recognition that he's Kohen Gadol when he does the avodah, because even a Kohen Hedyot wears 4 begodim, and therefore how do you do it? So the Gemara also makes the 4 begodim dependent on a different question. If the gartel, the belt, the white belt that the Kohen Gadol wore on Yom Kippur is different than the belt of a regular Kohen Hedyot. Why? Because the belt of a Kohen Hedyot was intermingled white and blue, because it had tcheles, which was wool, and pishton, which was flax, and in Yom Kippur it was only white. There's a question whether it was different, the belt. So we see that in itself, that he wears the belt, which has that which is a special garment of the Kohen Gadol, and therefore he becomes a Kohen Gadol. But according to those who say that a whole year the Kohen Hedyot also wore a belt only of white, and the Kohen Gadol was the one who wore the white and blue belt, therefore there's no recognition. Only therefore the Gemara concludes on our Papa that the fact that he does the service itself causes him to be a Kohen Gadol. The Rambam paskins like the end of the Gemara according to Rapopo. Therefore, he writes, that this service is only kosher by Kohen Gadol. Therefore, it makes him a Kohen Gadol because nobody else can do it. Because the Mishnah explains that we pass him like Rapopo because the Brisa there would seem to agree with him. The Rambam continues, whoever comes to take the place of the first one begins from where the first one left off. If Yom Kippur passed by, then the first one, and now the first one has regained the strength, or is no longer Tomei. The first one is the Kohen Gadol, since everything has passed by. Vasheni, the second one, Oiver, is no longer Kohen Gadol. However, since he was elevated, he therefore has all the obligations of a Kohen Gadol, such as he cannot marry a widow, and he can't leave his hair grow long, or to have his torn clothing, because he was a Kohen Gadol. But when he cannot do the avodah any day of the year in the 8 begodim, because the Kohen Gadol, that's his job. But if he did do so, the service is kosher. Now it would seem the 8 begodim, because he can't go back to the 4 begodim. The Rambam says if the first one dies, the second one is automatically in the place of the Kohen Gadol. And then we find in Yuma, if there was a psul, they established somebody else in his place. The first one goes back to his service, and the second one is a Kohen Gadol. That's what Rae says. He says the Rishon goes back to being a Kohen Gadol. The second one can't be a Kohen Gadol nor a regular Kohen. Why? Because if he be a Kohen Gadol, the first one will be jealous of him. There will be a hatred. And secondly, he can't be the regular Kohen because once he went up in a level, we don't bring him back down. Rabbi Yossi admits that if he did do the avodah, it's ksheira. That if the first one dies, that he goes back to being Kohen Gadol. And that's Rabbi Yossi, that Sheni becomes Kohen Gadol in his place. The Gezer Mishnah says, how does the Rambam give a contract, justify both two people? Why? First he says the second one does the avodah, is no longer allowed to do the avodah, and he says also that all the mitzvahs are obligatory on him, that he does have to be a Kohen Gadol like Rameya, and the answer Rabbi Yossi disagrees only what Rameya says that the second one can do the avodah, but Rabbi Yossi himself is also admits to Rameya that he has the obligations of a Kohen Gadol. The Gezer Mishnah also asked the Rambam Paskins ke Rabbi Yossi, why did he leave out the rule that he cannot avoid like a Kohen Hediot with 4 begodim? And he answers, once the Rambam says, Kol mitzvahs kunik gdoila olav, it's self-explanatory that he cannot do the avoid of a Kohen Hediot, because Malam Kodesh Shalom Meriden, and the Paske in the Rambam codifies the halacha totally according to Rabbi Yossi.